Good morning, g'day, good afternoon. It's Roger Roadside here saying, how the hell are ya? How the hell are ya? Listen, it's just a quick one this morning. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world today, and I was sort of thinking back to when I was a little kid. You know, when I was just a little jumbuck, just in my mother's pouch, just jumping about. I just remember having thoughts of what the world was going to look like when I was in my 20s, you know, when I was in my 30s, heck, when I was really old and I was in my 40s. I just sort of thought when I was growing up that there seemed to be a few problems in the world back then, and not half as many as what there are today. And I don't know, maybe that was just because I was looking at it through the lens as a little lad myself. But they kind of seemed, you know, I could identify that there were some problems. You know, there were problems over in Africa, there was starvation, there was this thing called AIDS, there was, you know, and as I got a little bit older, there was this thing called cancer. You know, people had to work, people wanted to work, but then also people complained about the fact that, you know, a lot of your focus or a lot of your life was just working for a living, you know. So those kind of problems always seem to be prevalent. But I kind of thought as a kid, do you know what? We'll, as a society, as a world, we'll overcome those things. We'll figure out homelessness. We'll figure out starvation in Africa. We'll figure that out. And by the time I'm in my 20s, all that will be behind us, and we'll fix that problem and we'll move on. And eventually, you know, naive little me thought eventually we'll fix all the problems and there just won't be any problems. And, you know, there'll be flying cars and there'll be robots and, you know, we'll live in a very sort of modern civilization, and everyone will just be content. Everyone will just be happy. And, you know, I'm now 47, right? So a lot of time has passed since I was a little jimbaroo. And I look at the state of the world and I look at the environment that we're in. And look, I know that, you know, when I was obviously a little lad, I know that I was looking at the world very naively. I appreciate that. You know, I appreciate that what my small little noggin was contemplating was something that was just unrealistic. However, with that said, even now thinking about it and thinking about all the division, not only here within the UK, but also back at home in Australia, over in the US, even in Europe. Europe 10 years ago seemed to be the sort of upper echelon. You know, it was sort of Europe, just, you know, the Netherlands and France and Spain, there seemed to be a bit of a prestige to them. And now you look at a lot of the footage of what's happening over there and the streets and, you know, you look at Paris and you look at some of the video footage that's coming out of there in regards to, you know, people fanging around there. It just looks dangerous and it looks dirty and it looks, if I'm honest with you, it looks like a shithole. And that's only been like over the last decade or so. You know, Paris used to be the land of love. Now I think it's probably the land of, you know, small little trinkets that people want to give to you as gifts, and then, you know, 2 seconds later ask you to give them 20 euros. If not, they'll stab you. So I don't know. It feels like the world is self-combusting. The world is self-imploding. And look, I might be wrong, and I would love people to tell me that I'm wrong. I would love people to go, Roger, you're having a meltdown here. There's loads of things that are really good in the world, but it just sort of feels like we're so far off from where I thought we would be when I was a little tacker, okay, yeah, you could argue that we've got robots and we've got the potential for flying cars. And so from a sort of technological standpoint, I think we're not too bad. But from a societal standpoint, from we seem to be working harder than ever before. We seem to be working for less than ever before. I remember when a can of Coke used to be 30p or 50p. And sorry, and I mean that in Australian terms. So 30 or 50 cents would probably be about 25 pence here. But now back at home, if you go into a milk bar or if you go into just a normal store, you're paying about $2.50 for a can of Coke. And it's just, I know that inflation, I know the rise in people's wages apparently and all that sort of stuff, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it's touching the sides. Anything that's semi-decent just doesn't feel like it's touching the sides. And it feels like instead of solving problems, we're just adding to them. And then it feels like we've got people in charge of, essentially politicians and governments are supposed to be the ones in charge of fixing problems. And it feels like all they ever do is, they talk about it. We need to learn from this, we need to learn from that, mistakes were made. We move on and we learn not to make those mistakes again in the future. Invariably what happens, we make those mistakes again. We lie about things, we help our mates out because we siphon taxpayers' money into the pockets of our mates or families or friends, and at the end of our term we try to leave things in a worse state, so that because we know that we're going to be losing our job, so we might as well leave it in as worse a state as possible to make it harder for the government coming in to fix it, and then that will give us a better chance of getting back in next time. Swings and roundabouts. We'll have 4 years in, 4 years off. It's like working at the bloody oil fields. But listen, I just wanted to I don't know, that's just what I'm sort of feeling at the moment. I just feel like things are drastically worse than what they were 10 years ago. And I don't know, look, I remember when I was younger, and I remember, my uncles and my grandparents and all sorts of stuff saying in my day, things used to be simpler and things used to be better and all this sort of stuff. And I just remember thinking that's such an old person's thing to say. And look, maybe it just is. Maybe it's just a natural progression of getting older. Maybe if I was in my 20s at the moment, I'd sort of be going, hey, things aren't too bad. I mean, I'm getting paid money and I can go away to Ibiza and I can go get slaughtered on the weekends and, I can eat as much Greggs as I want and life is happy. And maybe that's just, maybe when you're at that point of time in your life, maybe those sort of things are just what makes you happy. And then it's not until you actually start getting responsibilities and you have to pay taxes all the time, and you have to if you have a kid and you then become responsible for them and you try to make their future even better, and suddenly all these responsibilities just add up to the point where you just start going, I wish things were just like they were 20 years ago. I wish things were just like they were 30 years ago. It did honestly feel like things were simpler and things were easier. And that to me is sad. It's sad to think back that as a kid, I kind of thought that collectively we would be able to, fix things and, address issues and solve some problems, But instead, we just seem to manufacture more. But listen, get your comments down below. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. Do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? Do you think I'm, reading too much into it? Am I being, too dramatic? I don't know. Tell me. Tell old Roger Roadside what the truth is. Whether you agree with me or you don't agree with me, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Obviously, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It really does help me out. Make sure you like the video and share it with your friends, your family, your loved ones, even the people that you don't like. Just send them a link to the video and just say, hey, watch this, you prick. And yeah, see what happens. Listen, hope you're all having a good day. I'm going to say thank you, Mum, for the rabbits. Bye!